A Russian soldier planted a flag on the eastern edge of a village near Vovchansk, and the footage spread across Russian channels within hours as proof of another advance. Detection software flagged something else entirely. The video showed signs of being altered or generated by AI. The flag was fake, and it wasn't the first one. Tonight's story is about a war being fought twice. Once on the actual ground in Ukraine, and once on a set of maps built specifically to be shown to one man, and how far apart those two wars have grown. Welcome back. Let's start with the video itself, because the way it fell apart tells you almost everything. On July 27th, footage surfaced from a Russian source purporting to show a serviceman holding a Russian flag on the eastern outskirts of Bily Kolodyaz, southeast of Vovchansk. It was geolocated within a day by multiple independent trackers. Then came the second finding. Analysis using commercially available AI detection software indicated the footage may have been modified or generated by artificial intelligence. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense outlet Army Inform reported the same conclusion, citing its own geolocator on July 28th. The footage had been altered with AI. The Institute for the Study of War, which has tracked this conflict daily since it began, stated plainly that Russian sources, including the Russian Ministry of Defense itself, are using AI-altered footage to inflate claims of territorial gains. A single flag, a single soldier, a single frame of video. And it took independent analysts less than 24 hours to establish that the moment it claimed to capture may never have actually happened in front of a camera at all. Here's where it gets systemic rather than incidental. In late May, a Russian Ministry of Defense map dated April 9th leaked online. Ukrainian cartographers who reviewed it found it showing Russian forces holding significantly more territory around Kupiansk than any geolocated evidence could support. ISW's own assessment was blunt. No evidence exists to support the claims on that leaked map. And this wasn't an isolated bad map. According to ISW's tracking, Russia's own chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, presented highly inaccurate battlefield assessments for 5 consecutive months. His briefings repeatedly claimed Russian forces were advancing west of Kupiansk, a city Russian forces have never actually captured. By mid-May, the claims had escalated further. Gerasimov told his own command structure that Russian forces had seized all of Borova and 85% of Lyman. ISW found no evidence for either claim. 5 consecutive months is long enough to rule out a one-time reporting error or a single overeager subordinate. It describes a standing practice repeated on a schedule by the single officer responsible for briefing the country's commander-in-chief on the true state of the war. This is where the story stops being about propaganda aimed at the outside world and becomes something stranger. Propaganda aimed inward, at Russia's own head of state. ISW's assessment is direct on this point. The distorted picture presented to Vladimir Putin is likely leading him to believe his forces can achieve their combat objectives in the near and medium term, even as the actual effectiveness of Russia's offensive has been declining throughout the year. On July 3rd, Putin used a staged meeting with his senior commanders, Gerasimov, Northern Grouping Commander Yevgeny Nikiforov, Southern Grouping Commander Sergei Medvedev, to publicly claim Russian forces had seized Kostiantynivka. That claim contradicted all available evidence of the actual extent of Russian advances in the city. Reporting at the time noted the meeting was likely timed deliberately to influence Western media coverage heading into the American July 4th holiday weekend. Meaning the fabricated map wasn't just misleading Putin internally, it was simultaneously being staged as a message for foreign audiences deciding how to read the war's trajectory that same week. The gap between what Putin is shown and what's actually happening on the ground isn't abstract. It shows up in the raw numbers. Between January and late May 2026, Russian forces seized just 104 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. Over the same period in 2025, they had captured 1,619 square kilometers, roughly a 15-fold slowdown. In the Donetsk region specifically, the current pace of advance runs at about 2.63 square kilometers a day, a rate that would make finishing the capture of Donbass a question not of months, but of whether it's achievable at all. April 2026 went further still. Russian forces suffered a net loss of 116 square kilometers that month, the first time in the war their controlled territory had actually contracted rather than merely slowed. None of those figures require trusting a single Ukrainian claim. They come from tracking the same geolocated footage, village by village, that the fabricated maps were specifically built to paper over. And the fabrication doesn't stop at the top. It runs all the way down to individual frontline claims, contradicted by Russia's own sources. On August 13th, a source reporting specifically on Russia's northern grouping of forces refuted Russian claims of having seized Ivanivka, southeast of Vovchansk, stating plainly that Russian forces had not entered the village at all, and held only a marginal presence in nearby Zakharivka. That's not Ukraine disputing a Russian claim. That's a source embedded in the Russian military itself contradicting Moscow's own public statements about what its troops had actually achieved. The same institutional dishonesty that shapes what Putin sees in Moscow apparently runs in both directions at once, distorting the picture flowing up the chain just as much as it distorts what gets announced coming back down. Put all of these pieces together and a structure emerges that's more troubling than any single fake video. Frontline units, or the bloggers amplifying them, generate a claim, a village taken, a flag raised, a line advanced. Commanders pass it up the chain, sometimes checked, increasingly not. Gerasimov compiles it into briefings that inflate the picture further. Putin receives a version of the war that has been softened, inflated, and occasionally fabricated at every single stage between a trench near Vovchansk and his own briefing room. Each layer has its own incentive to look competent to the layer above it, and none of those incentives point toward telling the man at the top the truth. Which means the distortion isn't a single point of failure that could be fixed by replacing one dishonest general, but a structural feature of the entire reporting chain. None of this means Russia's military stops functioning or that its remaining offensive capacity is purely illusion. Russian forces continue to hold ground, continue to press specific sectors, and a 15-fold slowdown is still forward motion, however costly and however slow. But an army whose own supreme commander is making strategic decisions, including decisions about war termination and negotiating positions, based on a picture of the battlefield that his own general staff has spent 5 consecutive months distorting, is not an army operating from a position of clear-eyed strength. It's an army whose command structure has built a feedback loop, where the truth gets filtered out before it ever reaches the one person with the authority to act on it. A soldier planted a flag that detection software says may never have actually been planted at all. 5 months of briefings later, that same fabrication runs all the way to the top of the Kremlin, shaping decisions about a war that Putin himself may no longer be seeing clearly enough to actually end on realistic terms. If the maps guiding Russia's own commander-in-chief are built out of AI-generated flags and territory nobody actually holds, what happens the day reality finally catches up with the version of the war he's been shown? And who in that chain of command has to be the one to tell him?